You've ever finished a job and wondered, where'd all the money go? This video is for you. I'm going to show you how to price project without undercutting yourself or scaring off good clients. All right, so this video is part of a series of videos on all things estimating mastery. Make sure you check out the other videos after this one. The first thing I'm going to be mentioning about pricing is markup versus margin. We're going to get into all the nitty-gritty details of specific pricing, of oversights, things to include, labor, materials, all that kind of stuff. But I need to get started with the really important stuff first, which is markup versus margin, and knowing the difference and why it even matters. You may have heard it and you're like, isn't it like kind of the same thing? What does it really matter? Well, a 20% margin is equal to a 25% markup. The difference of this is when you calculate for overhead and your expenses. So if you're running an overhead type calculation, you're looking at your books and you may look for the past year. You made like $1 million. And let's say you've spent $100,000 on overhead. That is a 10% margin of overhead. Now, if you are marking up your estimates by 20% and you figure you've got a 10% margin, you're actually selling yourself short because a 20% markup is not a 20% margin. And it's actually probably about like I don't know exactly, 16, 17%. So really make sure that you're understanding the margin and markup and the difference between it, because typically speaking, overhead is going to be somewhere around 10, 15. I've even seen it up, higher 20, 25% in some contracting companies. So your markup is probably going to need to be around 25 to 30% to operate a larger business if you're hiring a management team with, project managers and different admin people and things like that in the mix. If you're still kind of the lone wolf or, the head honcho leader in your business and you're running all your projects and everything, you can afford to have a little bit lower markups. But the problem is that when you start to grow, if you want to hire and bring in these other people, your pricing is not in a position to facilitate that type of growth. And you're not going to be able to sell the same type of projects with the same, level of abilities that you have as you have to raise your prices in the future. So better to get that out of the way now, have a healthy markup, and make sure that you're covering your overhead as well as your personal salary, profits, as well as some contingency. No project goes as planned. No estimate is bulletproof. There's always going to be things that pop up, and you're probably always going to have something that ends up decreasing your margins throughout. So make sure you're pricing accordingly and you know the difference between markup, margin, and that's why it matters. All right. Number two, moving on to number two here is common oversights. So again, I want to get some stuff out of the way right off the bat here. And if you want free templates for estimating, the full template that we have for a new home build, as well as for home walkthroughs and an SOP, we got a 3 template stack. It's all free. Check out the links in the description below. Go grab that for yourself right now. So common oversights is project management. I know a lot of guys, especially starting out in doing GC type work, they feel like the project management is something that you include in the markup. I'm going to mark it up 25% or 30%. And that's kind of my salary as the project manager, or I have project managers, and that's how I pay them. The problem with this is you can't really attribute the hourly rate of your project manager to the project that they're managing. And how many projects do they need to manage to afford their hourly rate or their salary or whatever it may be. So that's why you need to include a separate line item for project management. Typically, I like to do this by how many hours per day are they going to be spending on the project. So if you're building a new home, maybe they're there, 2 hours a day. And it's not that they're on site 2 hours a day, but they're talking with trades, they're talking with clients, they're ordering materials, they're maybe meeting inspectors, whatever it may be, that amount of time, and then times it by, is this going to be a 7-8 month, home build? How much time are they going to be there? Times that by their hourly rate, plus of course the healthy markup, which I'm going to get to, like how to price labor. But typically for project management, you're probably going to be in the $100 an hour range. Figure out what makes sense for you. But that way, even if you are the one project managing, you know that you can hire a project manager and their salary is covered in the estimate. Making sense here? Can you see how that's very, very important and sets yourself up for growth and scaling? Now, the other thing that's common oversight is miscellaneous. And you may be a little afraid to put miscellaneous in an estimate because the client's like, why am I paying for miscellaneous stuff? What's this, right? But essentially, you could tell them every project that we've ever done in the entirety of construction always has something that was not accounted for, or something that comes up. There's a lot of variables, a lot of things that can go wrong. And we've found that there's always something. So instead of trying to, come back later, we had a little bit of miscellaneous, labor, a little bit of miscellaneous materials, because there's always something that we have got oversight. Or if there's small things that pop up in a project, we can take care of it without change ordering you to death for a couple $100 here, a couple $100 there, right? So add a little bit of miscellaneous into your budget. And then the final thing that's common on oversights is a risk assessment. Do a little bit of forward thinking. And is this project far away? Is, if it's a remodel, there's risks all over the place, right? Is this a 100-year-old home that who knows, what's behind the walls, or is there asbestos or aluminum wiring or whatever, right? So obviously you're going to check for these things before you start construction, but do a risk assessment. What are the risks involved? Do I need to price differently based off of these risks? The risk could be, I'm not too sure about this client. Maybe they're like a lawyer or, some bigwig or something like that. And they've talked about the other contractor that they fired, last year or whatever, right? So what are the risks? Price accordingly. All right. Still with me here? Number 3. These are things that you do not include. So when you're presenting a budget estimate proposal to a client, there's things that you don't want to have in your estimate. Now, feel free to add these, but generally speaking, especially early on, before you know kind of where this is going, that first real rough estimate, itemized estimate that you're providing to a client, present them with, this is, doable. This is like base pricing. And then from here, depending on what they select or the options and where things go, the price will, kind of go up from there. And things that you don't want to include, like permits, unless you know specifically every, project like this, the permit is $5,000. Put that in there. If it's a variable thing that has to do with the county, the city, your district, whatever it may be, where it's like service upgrades for, water connections or electrical connections or stuff like that is very variable. And essentially the, the government, district, city, whatever, whoever is going to send a bill for that, leave that out and just let the client know that these things are variable. I don't really know how much they're going to cost because, we get charged from XYZ at the government by their people that come out, and this is an unknown cost. That's why I have not included it. But you can expect that having, these upgrades, which you may or may not have to do, it could be anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000, right? So you let them know, you're open and upfront about it. You're not trying to hide anything, but you're just trying to remove variables. All right. Other things that you want to exclude, don't include this, is extras. So if they're like, yeah, you know what, we want to remodel our whole home, and we're also thinking of maybe extending our garage or finishing out our basement as well, but we might just stick to the main floor. If you want to give them different versions, that's fine. But typically speaking, definitely do a separate estimate. Don't just give them the one big shot, everything included, and then tell them you can remove stuff later. Have either options for it or have a base one. This is for your main floor. If you choose to do the basement as well, that's going to be an extra $60,000 or whatever it may be, right? Again, you want to chunk the numbers for options so that you can keep the main scope of work as low as possible. And if they want extras or considering other things, have it as a secondary option, as well as gray areas. So if there's, again, some sort of gray area where they're not sure or you're not sure, landscaping is one of these things. If you get a set of plans for a new home build, it's often that, they've got the floor plans and elevations and all that kind of stuff, but they don't really have a landscape plan. Then either just leave it out and say to be included upon, final plans or selections or whatever. All right. So we've talked about a lot of things that are sort of contingent, and those are really important things that a lot of people don't think about, when you think about pricing, but those influence the entire kind of sales process and budget for the client a lot more than some of the other things, which I'm going to get into now, even though these are more important because they will eventually either, let you know if you've actually making money or losing money. Grab these templates in the description. They will help you make sure that your pricing is on point and you're not forgetting anything in your estimate. All right. So number 4 is labor pricing. Labor pricing is the easiest way to lose money on a construction project, is what I've found. It's often the thing that kind of goes out the window and is very hard to know exactly for a lot of reasons. Guys are kind of all over the place, or can be. You got weather, you got site conditions, you got lots of different things that can happen with labor. Often, especially if you're an entrepreneur, your vision of the future is generally optimistic and maybe a little bit rosy, and you're not really taking into account all the things that can go wrong, which is why you do the risk assessment. But what you want to be thinking about labor pricing is you're going to have a wage. So if you're paying your guy, let's say, $30 an hour, you ought to be adding the things like any taxes, workers' comp, even things like having to buy them clothing or training, all that like downtime kind of stuff, admin costs that go along with having that employee. Anything that employee costs you money, you need to be accounted for on top of their wage. And then on top of that, I would say you probably want at least a 50% markup on the labor, because that 50% markup is sort of contingency, where if you've estimated 30 hours for this item in the budget, it's very easy that could go to 40. And of course, you want to always add a little bit extra hours more than you think, but it gives you that ability to make sure that if you give them raises in the future, or if something goes wrong in the project, you've got that padding built in there, so that you've got that 50% markup. And then on top of that, you've got another, whatever, maybe 25, 30% markup for the whole project. So how this looks is you've got $30. Typically, it's going to be about double for the burden and the 50% markup for contingency. So that 30 goes to 60, potentially higher, but let's say 30 goes to 60. And then you're going to, on top of that 60, you're going to put an additional 25, 30% for your project, overhead and margin and everything like that. Making sense? And then the next thing with pricing for labor is, what I like to do is do a mental walkthrough of what the person's actually going to be doing. And if you've worked in the trades before, you're going to know this a lot better. If not, you may need to talk to, somebody else on site or something like that and maybe get their input. But if it's like, they've got to demo this wall and build this wall, or they've got to build this house, like framing wise, it's sort of like, with my history, how long has it taken? How can things go wrong? And what are they going to need every day, or that day? If, let's say you've got 20 hours in there, well, they're going to have to show up on site every day. They're going to have to clean up. They're going to have to do this. So just do a little mental walkthrough of the work. And often that'll help you sort of chunk things into like, okay, that will take 2 hours, and that'll be 5. And then, they got another 8, or there's like this many days and they've got to take down setup, so do a mental walkthrough, and that really helps you get a lot clearer of a picture of how many hours or days a project is actually going to take. All right. So moving on to point number 5, we are talking about material pricing. So how much are the materials going to cost going into this project? You should be using some sort of software, ideally, or at least have a database of spreadsheets, something like that. There's going to be some pricing database, and there's 2 different types of pricing databases typically. There is going to be kind of your online resources. These are things like RS Means or Build One, or there's a number of them out there where it's essentially a live database that you can reference for pricing at any time, and it's going to have pricing for your area at that specific point in time. But you may also have things where you've got your own pricing database. Those things are going to be pricing that you've just kind of figured out over time, and then you put it in your database. A good way to save time is if you're ever looking up pricing online or anywhere else and it's not in your online, database that I mentioned where it's live, make sure you put that into your hard copy pricing database so that you don't have to go and look it up every single time. One caveat is, if you put a price in there last year and you're like 1 or 2 years later, you probably need to update that price. So that's the problem with having like a hard database that you're just putting numbers into. It's very helpful, but just remember that you do need to check it and update it from time to time to make sure that the pricing isn't old and there hasn't been, inflation or changes in the cost of items. Next thing is make sure you're putting on a little bit of waste. So 5, 10, 15% even, depending on the material and what it is. Always have some, if you need 1,000 2x4s, you probably want to order 1,200, right? Or 1,500. That's a little much maybe. But anyways, if you need 1,000, like 1,100, 1,150, something like that, right? 10 to 15% at least for things that are more critical, like tile or flooring, where you can't just run to the store and get more, especially if it's special ordered. Make sure you're ordering or at least estimating like an extra 20% of waste, because you do not want to have to try to, skimp on it, order, and then something, doesn't come in or whatever. You got to order more and now you're paying extra for it. Delivery as well. So make sure you put your delivery costs in your materials. This typically I would have a separate line item of like deliveries and however many deliveries you think you're going to need for the project, because there's always something that you need, shipped to the site, or you need some guy to go pick up, whether it's one of your guys or what have you. So make sure you're including the delivery as well. And then assemblies are always an easy way to have built-in kind of pricing. And assemblies, depending on your estimating software, but you'll have sort of separate pricing for stuff. But let's say like a 2x6 wall, exterior wall. Well, you're going to have the studs. You're going to maybe have some bolts or fasteners, your nails, your glue or sill plate. You know, you can have double top plates and OSB sheeting and Typar, Tyvek, house wrap, whatever you want to call it. All of that can sort of be built into an assembly, and you can have like a overall price for something like that without having to price all those things individually. And that's where assemblies come in really handy and can speed up your estimating a lot quicker and help you price things a lot quicker as well. And of course, you know, you got to double check your numbers every now and then if you don't have that live pricing in your model. So next thing we're moving on here is number 6, and that is selections. So your client is going to have selections of preferences that they want installed in their home or their office space, you know, commercial property, whatever it may be. When you're starting out, if you're doing like a rough budget type of a budget where they haven't made selections yet, you're just kind of pricing out the project, always do sort of mid to low allowances, because again, you don't want to scare off your client by pricing these high-end fixtures or luxury kind of things, and then the price be inflated and they bounce because it's, you know, well over what they expected or whatever for the estimates. Make sure that you have like solid allowances in there and it's clearly stated allowance. Also, for allowances, make sure you have some sort of documentation in there if taxes are included or not. If you're going to pay taxes on top of materials, then, you know, is that part of the allowance or not part of the allowance? And you want to make sure that that is understood, as well as your selections, right? If they have a bathtub in there for, you know, $1,200 or something like that, and you've got whatever taxes may be on top of that, you want to make sure that it's clear to them that that allowance includes taxes or doesn't include taxes, and obviously the adjustment would have to be made. And then have your preferred vendors somewhere. So when the client is going in to get selections, even if you're not dealing with this and a designer is dealing with this, make sure you're talking with the designer and letting them know that these are your preferred vendors. Have a list of preferred vendors, because first of all, it's easier to do business with someone recurring. You probably have, you know, contractor pricing discounts, whatever, with certain vendors. So you may as well be referring those vendors to clients to make selections. And it's just easier getting pricing from a few different people that you already know than the client just going out there and shopping around, or some designer just using all these different suppliers all over town. You know, they've got 3 different type of tile from 3 different type of suppliers, and it's just a mess, right, to go and actually get this stuff or price it out. So have a list of preferred vendors, provide that to the client, provide that to the designer. Yes, they can go off, you know, out of those, but at least you are trying to kind of rein them in as far as like which suppliers that they should be selecting from. All right, now we got the 7th thing here. This is equipment. All right, so equipment is things like rentals. And if you're supplying your own equipment, you can rent it out to the client if it's big things, because that way the client is paying for the use of it, essentially. This isn't going to work for everything. Like, you're not going to rent out your skill saws or some basic thing that's very expected. But if you've got to rent like a large generator, or, you know, pumps to pump out their lot because there's a lot of water in it or something like that, and you happen to have a pump, but typically you'd have to rent that, put stuff like wear and tear on machinery or rentals into your budget, and have a little bit of rental space in there. Again, even if you're like, I'm not sure if I really need a rental here, there's always things that come up. Sometimes you need to rent a bunch of humidifiers because maybe the, you know, humidity is really high and you've got hardwood floors going in and you need to keep, you know, the humidity down or whatever, right? So just be thinking forward: scaffolding, fencing, site protection, whatever it may be, that you have some sort of rental in there. And then the last thing on equipment is security. What kind of security do you setting up cameras nowadays is a really great way to make sure the site's taken care of, make sure your materials aren't going off site, and have that as a line item in your estimate. You know, $100 a month or whatever it may be for on-site security, and let the client know. You'll get access to the security. You can check the footage. It's live. You can see, you know, what's happening on site, all this kind of stuff, right? So this is a big bonus, both to you as a builder and the client. And then just put it in there, have the client pay for it, because it's an added service, added value. You can buy your own cameras and your own security equipment if you want, and again, rent it to the client if that makes sense. However you want to set it up, but it's something that can be done, and just price it into your project. All right, so now you should know how to price your project well without losing money. Make sure you go check out the next video in the series. This is estimating mastery. This next one is on fixing proposals. proposal. So now that you've got the pricing and everything in place, you've got to go fix your proposal to make sure you can put the proposal in front of a client and sell the project. You don't want to miss that. Go check out the next video.